So you're constantly, I know, watching the situation in Ukraine. So as we sit here this evening, what are your latest thoughts on the state of the war?
Well, I still think that you have a state of entropy in Bakhmut and most of the front at the moment. And entropy really is a concept in the military that after an initial shock or surprise, that things regress to a norm, and that's really what we're seeing. So you're not seeing any big advances. And if you take the Bakhmut front, the Russians have advanced 12 kilometers in 200 days, which is about as much as you would advance in a day at an egg and spoon race in a primary school. So
Yeah.
they're not going anywhere fast there. That doesn't mean it's they're not learning from that. I think there's two things that you can say they're doing at the moment, which may be bad for the future in terms of Ukrainian offensives in a number of months' time. The first one is they seem to be adopting a kind of probe, reveal, pound concept, which is probing the defenses around Bakhmut, letting the Ukrainians reveal that, and then pounding them with artillery. And then that's really more at night with the Wagner forces. And they're also sort of doing a train, hold, retain when it looks like they've got 25% of their mobilized combat power forward, 25% in rear areas, and 50% training. Now, that is important because one of the things in the temperatures last week were minus 17 around eastern Ukraine in the Donbass is this non-battle injury, which will occur if you're largely static. Now, I speak from a bit of experience here because I fought in the Falklands, which was deemed very early on to be the Winter War in one of the books that came out. And if you take my unit, 18 were killed in action, 36 were wounded in action, and 48 were non-battle injuries with trench foot and frostbite.
Right.
So, managing that, the environment as much as the tactics, is a challenge for both sides.
And I suppose all the importance of cold weather equipment and just the issue of the material that troops are given helps to keep them warm when they need to be warm and dry. And these things are, well, as you say, it's as important as weaponry. In some cases, more so. I mean, you mentioned the Wagner Group mercenaries, and we know in recent days there was a big Ukrainian strike on the headquarters of those mercenaries. Just set out for us the importance of the Wagner Group to Russia in this war.
Well, the worry is that you have a sort of militarization of the battlefield, and more worrisome is that might reach back to Russia in the future. And this is why, for example, I think there was some leaking last week from the FSB about opinion polls, which showed a sort of slight anti-war stance amongst some of the population to try and flush out these sort of ultra-nationalists, of which the Prigozhin, of course, and the Wagner Group are some of these. And it's not clear that really the Wagner Group are under the sort of control of the sort of southern and central fronts, really. So are they doing their own thing? Because, as we said a number of times, the Bakhmut battle is almost a waste of strategic time. It's a
Mm.
tactical battle which doesn't seem to lead to any decent operational outcome. So partly this is to do with the politics of Russia. Who is going to be in the ascendant and who is going to take the blame and who will take over? Now, I'm not suggesting that Prigozhin is going to be the guy who will replace Putin in the future, but it is one of those tensions in the sort of Kremlin about who is going to be in the ascendant in the future. Is it the ultra nationalists, those who want to escalate the war, or is there this sort of pragmatic element in Russia which will flush that out in due course? Now, the answer to that is none of us actually know.
No, so conflicting orders on the battlefield as a consequence of these, I know, these cross currents of let us call it politics, because ultimately I guess that's what it is. So from these irregular soldiers to the very opposite when it comes to the British Army. There have been some reports, we'll have seen them, got a lot of attention, of British Special Forces, Marine Commandos and so on, playing a role at different points in Ukraine. They were used, we now know, to escort British diplomats out of Ukraine and then back into Ukraine when a diplomatic presence was re-established, and to guard diplomats and so on. But there was also a reference to some involvement in special operations. Now, I guess we do not know what that precisely referred to, do we, Chip? Because these things are highly, as it were, under wraps. But what sort of thing might we be discussing?
Well, let's split that up really. So you really have to look at the original chronology. And of course, the press always like going to a maximalist position. So on the 11th of February, 13 days before the war started, The Foreign Office told people to leave Ukraine if they shouldn't didn't need to be there. On the 12th of February, James Heappey, who you referenced earlier on, the Armed Forces Minister, said that they would evacuate all the British personnel who were training there, who had been since 2015, under a thing called Op Orbital. And the embassy then relocated on the 18th of February from Kiev to Lviv. And of course, force protection of any diplomats is something that you need to do. So that is one of the things they probably did. The war started on the 24th of February, and the embassy went back to Kiev in April. So it wasn't special forces; it was 4-5 Commando under the control of 3 Commando Brigade. It was not an operation by Directorate Special Forces. Now, what special forces can do, and what you see the Ukrainians doing is, of course, they really have two principal roles. One is information and reporting to get, target data, as it were, and the second one is direct action. In Ukraine, we're really seeing that from partisan activity. So one of the things we're seeing is human intelligence from the locals giving coordinates back to SBU, which is the sort of main intelligence branch of the Ukrainians, and that is providing the targeting information for precision strikes. So this again plays to this thing that I've banged on about a lot, that it's a nation at war, not an army at war. So this is always very vital for the Ukrainians in terms of their precision strikes.
Yeah.
And is also why you have this war after the war. If the Russians had been successful early on, this nation mobilized means that there will always be this partisan activity against the Russians in any mode that they're in.
Right. Now, talking of special forces or specially trained forces, Ukraine has a body of special forces who are said to be very capable, aren't they, on the battlefield?
Yeah, they are, and a lot of them has been trained by the Americans, and I'm sure, well, I know that a lot of the intelligence that's being given, high level intelligence, is from the Americans. And one of the things which will come out in subsequent years, I think, is the signals intelligence, the SIGINT power, which has been applied to this war. That's highly classified at the moment, so you won't see anything. But that also enables the Ukrainians to go about their merry business. But in the wider round, you can say that the Ukrainians will always surprise you by their ingenuity and their innovation. They're a kind of MacGyver army, if you remember and recall the sort of TV program where MacGyver could make nuclear weapons out of a piece of string and a tin can. They're able to do this. They're an army of innovation, an armed forces of innovation. So they're going to surprise us in the next few months. I don't think it will be before January, but they'll surprise us probably with an offensive somewhere because the ground will be frozen enough to enable this. There are a number of areas you could say that there are options to do this, but they will take the offensive before Rasputitsa, the
Yeah.
mud of spring, comes again when you just can't maneuver in the way you'll be able to when the ground is frozen.
Right. Now, just speaking of America and the support that America is giving to Ukraine, a lot of headlines now about the supply of I suppose, a limited number of Patriot air defense missiles. What is the significance of that? Ukraine does have less advanced missiles already, don't they?
They do. The significance really is this: if you look at the today, all 14 Shahad 136 missiles which were aimed at Kyiv were knocked down, taken out, and the ability to do that by the Ukrainians is there. The fear for the future is this sort of mini alliance, as it were, between Iran and Russia. And if the Iranians were to give Fatah 110 and Zalfurga missiles, these are ballistic missiles to Russia, then there could be a greater continuance of their infrastructure energy campaign against the critical national infrastructure of Ukraine. And it's that role that Patriot missiles would really take on. They're very capable of knocking down ballistic missiles in the way that some of the systems, very capable systems, but can't do with some of the other things that have been given. For example, Gepard anti-aircraft weapons from Germany, and the Iris-T, for example, from Germany.